Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving again. It's a wonderful time to be thankful, and here we are, and I'm thankful that we get to be in church and do this together. Well, today I want to tell you guys a little story before I get into my message. Early on in my marriage with Julie, with my wife, you remember, that stage, guys, this stage where you're like still trying to impress her? So this was early on. I think we've been married just like we're talking months, and I was still I wanted to really show her the kind of man that my wife married. And so we were coming home from a church event. This was like February, something like that. We're coming home from a church event, and there was snow everywhere. And never in my life, you see, I wasn't one of those guys who got a car early in their teens. I didn't have a car in my teens, and I didn't rip around and drive around town. That wasn't me at all. And for some reason, in that moment, I thought that what would impress my wife is that if I could find a clear intersection with some ice on it, I could do a donut. It's funny how you get to know how you get to know somebody, because that would not impress my wife at all. So just a little background, just so you guys know. So my wife, her family, my father-in-law, builds hot rods and races them. So my little 2002 Toyota Matrix was not going to impress my wife, at all. Even if I did a donut, it wasn't going to impress her. I know that now. And so, but either way, so I found a clear intersection. There was 2 inches of snow on top, and I was like, that's perfect. I'm just going to whip around there. She's going to think I'm such a manly man. This is great. And so we go to the stop sign. There's nobody coming. It's late at night, and I turn to my wife, Julie, and I say, hey, honey, check this out. And then I stomp on the gas, and I turn the wheel, and because of the ice, though turning the wheel did nothing. And I just went straight across the intersection and into the ditch on the other side. And my wife is so gracious, she never said a word. she just kind of looked at me. We hadn't been married that long, but I knew exactly what she thought. And so I did. In my nervousness, I'm like, I got to fill the void with some words. So I said, there's a shovel in the back. She said, you can do the shoveling. And so I had to get out. I had to shovel. What should have been a 30-minute drive home turned into a 2-hour drive home. And let me tell you, driving home, I suffered. The humiliation. She wasn't picking on me or anything like that. I was just humiliated because of what I did. And so, this whole month, we're talking about Lamentations. And Lamentations really is a book about suffering. And so this morning, I just want to say this, there is a kind, hopefully this isn't about to blow anyone's minds, okay? There is a kind of suffering that you can endure that's entirely your fault, right? Am I blowing anyone's mind? This is why you came to church in the rain, for this hard-hitting, deep, biblical interpretation stuff. There's a kind of suffering that you can endure that's your fault, right? That was entirely my fault. I'm the one who stomped on the gas. I'm the one who thought it would be a good idea to do a donut intersection, and I'm the one that brought the car straight into the ditch. And so for the rest of the ride, I suffered, and it was entirely my fault, and I know that. Now, there's also a kind of suffering that you can endure because of someone else's mistake. So, for example, my wife did not stomp on the gas. She did not turn the steering wheel. She didn't ask me to do that, but now she's suffering what should have been a 30-minute drive home. It's now a 2-hour drive home, and she is going to suffer because of my choices. Is anyone confused yet? It's no, we understand this, right? We understand this kind of level of suffering. Well, in the book of Lamentations, it goes out of its way. It deep dives into the heart of the different kinds of suffering. And so there's certainly the kinds of suffering that we can experience that's entirely our fault. We understand that. There's also the kind of suffering, it's harder. It's kind of more painful. It's harder to explain, but we understand it thoroughly from our own experience. There is a kind of suffering that we endure at the hands of others that's entirely not our fault. And then there's also a kind of suffering that comes from God. That one's tough, and we don't like to talk about that one. But I promise you, during the course of this series, we absolutely will talk about that kind of suffering, the kind of suffering that comes from God. We certainly will. What I want to do this morning is I want to read to you from the book of Lamentations. I'm going to read quite a bit because I want you to kind of get into this book that we don't often like to get into. Now, before I start reading, I just want to let you know a little bit of context about the book of Lamentations. The book of Lamentations was most likely written by the prophet Jeremiah. So Jeremiah also wrote the book of Jeremiah. Immediately after the book of Jeremiah is the book of Lamentations. And the book of Lamentations was written in a period of Israel's history when they were in apostasy. They had turned their back on God. They had fled from him. They were in sin. They were in open rebellion. And generations of prophets were in Jerusalem prophesying and pleading with the people, saying, if you don't stop your sin, if you don't change your heart, if you don't go back to the Lord, then we're all going to be destroyed. And instead of listening to those prophets, they killed those prophets. Jeremiah, when he was prophesying against Jerusalem, saying, if you don't change, if you don't go back to God, they imprisoned him. They threw him in prison. And from prison, he's pleading with the people, go back to God, or else there's going to be some serious consequences. And then in 585 or 65 BC, the kingdom of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, was besieged by the Babylonian Empire, and for 2 years the city was under siege. And for those 2 years they endured horrific conditions. The Bible talks about the people, eating their children because they were so hungry. And for 2 years they were in just terrible, in disease, just a terrible condition. And then at the end of those 2 years, the Babylonians destroyed the city gates. They flooded into the city, and the destruction was terrible. Killed a tremendous amount of people, those that were still alive within the city. And then from those survivors, they took the healthiest and the most educated, and they took them and they brought them out of Jerusalem and into the Babylonian Empire, and they were in exile. They left behind the criminals, they left behind the sick, they left behind those who wouldn't survive the journey, and they left them there. Jeremiah, because he was imprisoned, he was left behind. And so they didn't take the prisoners with them, they just left the prisoners, and Jeremiah was left behind. And the book of Lamentations is exactly that. It is a lament. It's a poem of sorrow and sadness. And the book of Lamentations, you wouldn't know this because we speak, most of us, we speak English, and the translation I'm about to read to you is from English. But in Hebrew, the book of Lamentation is actually an acrostic poem. And so what it is every line starts with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so that's not going to translate for us because we've got a different alphabet, but it's a very poetic book of sorrow and sadness. And I want to read some to you on Thanksgiving Sunday. And so I'm going to read from Lamentations chapter 2, starting in verse 22, and then I'm going to read right into chapter 3, verse 1, all the way to 18. And it goes like this. Lamentations 2:22 says, you have invited terrors from all around, as though you were calling them to a day of feasting. In the day of the Lord's anger, no one has escaped or survived. The enemy has killed all the children whom I carried and raised. Chapter 3, verse 1 continues, I am the one who has seen the afflictions that come from the Lord, or the rod of the Lord's anger. He has led me into darkness, shutting out all light. He has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. He has made my skin and flesh grow old. He has broken my bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with anguish and distress. He has buried me in a dark place like those long dead. He has walled me in and I cannot escape. He has bound me in heavy chains, and though I cry and shout, he has shut out my prayers. He has blocked my way with a high stone wall. He has made my road crooked. He has hidden like a bear or a lion waiting to attack me. He has dragged me off the path and torn me into pieces, leaving me helpless and devastated. He has drawn his bow and made me the target for his arrows. He shot his arrows deep into my heart. My own people laugh at me. All day long they sing their mocking songs. He has filled me with bitterness and given me a bitter cup of sorrow to drink. He has made me chew on gravel. He has rolled me in the dust. Peace has been stripped away, and I have forgotten what prosperity is. I cry out, my splendor is gone. Everything I had hoped for from the Lord is lost. The thought of my suffering and homelessness is bitter beyond words. Happy Thanksgiving. God sounds terrible, doesn't he? Doesn't he? Sounds pretty rough. I mean, look, doesn't that sound bad? It says, he has led me into darkness. It says, he has turned his hand against me. It says, he has walled me in. He has bound me in chains. He has shut out my prayers. You know, where the writing as though the author is crying out to God and God is plugging his ears, blocking him up. This sounds pretty terrible, doesn't it? This makes God sound pretty terrible. What you need to know about the book of Lamentations and what is vital to reading a passage like this, because man, this is a character assassination of who God is, isn't it? It's like he has made me chew on gravel. He has besieged me. He has rolled me in the dust. What you need to know about the book of Lamentations is that although there's one author, it's Jeremiah, he is writing from two perspectives, and that's incredibly important. He is writing, so he writes as Jeremiah, the weeping, sorrow, devastated, faithful prophet. And then he also writes as the personification of the city of Jerusalem, weeping, broken, devastated, rebellious, sinful Jerusalem. What's important to know about Jerusalem and its destruction is at the very end of its destruction, at the end of that 2-year siege, is that Jeremiah is still in prison and that the people have not repented. What's important to know when you read the book of Jeremiah or the book of Lamentations is that these people that have been devastated, who have suffered, have not changed their perspective or their opinion of God, which is a fascinating thing because for us, most of us think that if we suffer enough, we'll change. We think that if we suffer enough, you know, like if we just lived through the consequences, we would never do it again. Is that true? Most of us know from personal experience that no matter how many times you make the same mistakes, no matter how many times you suffer for it the next day, you still do it. You know, I've never met a smoker who thought it was a good idea. And yet, you know, we think, you know, it's like, oh, if we just suffer enough, we'll change. But what we see and what I'm going to show you here is that even though we suffer, suffering itself rarely changes what we do. Or at least not for long. So I want to show you that this passage, this isn't Jeremiah. This isn't faith-filled, God-loving Jeremiah who's writing this. He is writing this from the perspective of wicked, sinful Jerusalem. And I want to prove that to you. And so first of all, in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 1 to 2, we don't have it on the screen, that's okay. In Jeremiah 16, verse 1 to 2, there's a fascinating little conversation that God has with Jeremiah. In it, it's very small, it's easy to miss it, but in that passage, Jeremiah 16, verse 1 to 2, God tells Jeremiah, do not get married or have children. He says, do not get married or have children in Jerusalem specifically. He says, don't do it. Don't get married. Don't have kids. So in Lamentations 2, verse 22, the very first verse I read, it said this, you, talking about God, you have invited terrors from all around as though you were calling them to a day of fasting. In the day of the Lord's anger, no one has escaped or survived. The enemy has killed all the children whom I carried and raised. Jeremiah did not have any children. This is still Jerusalem. Last week, I read like 20 verses about Jerusalem, who's been personified in the book of Lamentations, crying out in her sorrow. This is from the perspective of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, even after its destruction, has not changed. They are still rebellious. They're still in open defiance of God. How so? I've got another verse for you. After the destruction of Jerusalem, I told you that the Babylonians came in. They took everyone who is healthy, everyone who's educated, who survived, and they take them into exile into Babylon. They leave behind all the stragglers, and they set up a puppet government in the city of Jerusalem. Well, the people of Jerusalem, or the people of Israel, weren't all in Jerusalem. And so after the Babylonians leave, it says that some guerrilla fighters, like some freedom guys, they come back into Jerusalem and they overthrow the puppet government. And then they're the ones that free Jeremiah. And this is what they say in Jeremiah chapter 42, verse 1. It says, then all the guerrilla leaders, like these guys who came back in, who freed Jerusalem from the puppet government, it says, then all the guerrilla leaders, including Johanan, son of Kareah, and Jezaniah, son of Hoshaiah, and all the people from the least to the greatest, approached Jeremiah the prophet. And they said, please pray to the Lord your God for us. Lord your God. Interesting. We're going to see that in a minute. Please pray to the Lord your God for us. As you can see, we are only a tiny remnant compared to what we were before. Pray that the Lord your God will show us what to do and where to go." "All right," verse 4, "All right," Jeremiah replied, "I will pray to the Lord your God," which is interesting. Jeremiah says, "I'll pray to the Lord your God." It's like, it's our, he's like, "I'll pray to the Lord your God as you have asked, and I will tell you everything he says. I will hide nothing from you." Verse 5, "Then they said to Jeremiah, 'May the Lord your God be a faithful witness against us if we refuse to obey whatever he tells us to do. Whether we like it or not, we will obey the Lord our God to whom we are sending you with our plea. For if we obey him, everything will turn out well for us.'" These are guys who've learned their lesson, aren't they? Can anyone sense the foreboding? So remember, these are the guys who just watched Jeremiah for years prophesy that this powerful, prosperous city, that if it stayed in its wickedness and its disobedience, it was going to be utterly destroyed. And for 2 years, he's proved right. And then after all of this, this is as far as a prophet goes, he's standing in the place where everything he has said has come true. And then people come to him again and they say, this time, we will do what you say. And then it says that Jeremiah in the next verse, it says that he seeks the Lord for 10 days and he gives them the message. And it says the message is to stay in Jerusalem. To stay in that destroyed place, and it's going to be rebuilt, and they'll be spared if they just stay in the city of Jerusalem. And in chapter 43, it says this, verse 1, it says, "When Jeremiah had finished giving this message from the Lord their God to all the people, Azariah son of Hoshaiah and Jonanan son of Kareah, and all the other proud men said to Jeremiah, 'You lie! The Lord our God hasn't forbidden us to go to Egypt. Baruch son of Neriah has convinced you to say this because he wants us to stay here and be killed by the Babylonians or be carried off into exile.'" Verse 4 says, "So Johanan and the other guerrilla leaders and all the people refused to obey the Lord's command and stay in Jerusalem." What do? They go off to Egypt. Guess what happens in Egypt? They die. So this is them. After 2 years of being told exactly what to do, being told exactly how to prevent the disaster, they don't listen. They get destroyed. They get their second chance. They go to Jeremiah, the same guy whose every word came true. And they say, "We promise to do what you say." And then Jeremiah says, "Okay, God says stay here." And they say, "You lie. We're going to do what we want. We're going to go suffer again. This time we're going to die not in Jerusalem. We're going to go die in Egypt because maybe it's nicer, I don't know." You see, this is the state. This is the people. And so when Lamentations is written and when Jeremiah is personifying the city of Jerusalem, what you need to see is that this is not a repentant city. This is not a faith-filled city. Jeremiah, his piece is going to come. Next week, we're going to hear about what Jeremiah says, how he laments. But right now, we have not read the lament of Jeremiah. We have read the lament of a people who are still in rebellion. And so I have to ask, I have to say this, I have to highlight this. When it says those terrible things, this character assassination against God, when it says, "He has led me into darkness, shutting out all light," what we have to ask is that true? Did God do that? You see, there is a kind of person, and this is where we're going to sit for a minute. There is a kind of person that when suffering the consequences of their own actions, blames God. There is a kind of person. This is what Jerusalem's doing. You see, Jerusalem was in sin. And in its sin and still in its rebellion, they're sad, they're heartbroken, they're devastated, all those things, but they're not changed. And in their sin, in their rebellion, what do they say? They were in darkness, and who do they say the darkness is from? Do they stand there and say, "I am in darkness because of my own sin"? Am I in darkness because of the consequences of my own actions? Am I suffering because I have made poor decisions? No, what they say is, "God did this to me." When the truth is, my brothers and sisters, God did not do this to them. Sin did this to them. Let me read it to you this way. You see, Jerusalem is performing a character assassination of God, and they say that he has led me into darkness, shutting out all the light. I want to highlight and say that that is not true. Sin leads you into darkness, and sin shuts out all light. This is the personification of a rebel. He has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. Oh no, church, you suffer from sin, but it's not suffering from the hand of God. It's suffering from sin itself. He has made my skin and flesh grow old. He has broken my bones. No, my brothers and sisters, God heals. Sin breaks you. He has besieged and surrounded me with anguish and distress. No, my brothers and sisters, they surrounded themselves with anguish and distress because of their sin. He has buried me in a dark place like those long dead. No, it's your sin that buries you and makes you feel dead even yet while you're alive. He has walled me in. No, that's sin. He has bound me in heavy chains. No, that's sin. He has shut out my prayers. No, God has not shut out your prayers. It's your sin that has shut out the prayers of Jerusalem. Don't you see? There is a kind of person that blames God, this unchanged, unrepentant, still rebellion, sad, certainly. But there is a kind of person that suffers the consequences of their own choices and say, it's not me, it's God. You see, sin is deceitful, sin is desperate, and sin is cunning. Sin will cost more than you planned to pay. Sin will hold you longer than you planned to stay. Sin will take you deeper than you can dive. Sin will make you feel dead when you're alive. You see, there is a kind of person that can suffer poorly. How do we suffer poorly? Oh, church, this is how you suffer poorly. This is how. You say, is it my actions? Is it me? Is it my own choices that have brought me to this place? No, it couldn't have been me. It must be God. You see, there's two characters in the book of Lamentations. There really is. There's Jeremiah, weeping, suffering, faithful Jeremiah. Next week, we're going to talk a lot more about him and what he has to say in the book of Lamentations. There's Jerusalem, weeping, broken, desperate, rebellious Jerusalem, and we see how they respond to suffering. I've just read it, and it's poorly. But the reality is that there is another character in this story and in ours. You see, it's amazing to me that that Jerusalem goes through this list, and he says, "This is what God has done to me." But my brothers and sisters, the reason why the book of Lamentations is so important, the reason why we're reading it on Thanksgiving, isn't because God did this to Jerusalem, but it's that God does this for Jerusalem. What do I mean by that? In Matthew chapter 23, Matthew chapter 23, verse 37, Jesus, 500 years later, there's Jesus, and he's standing on the hilltops outside of Jerusalem, and this is what he says about it. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who have killed the prophets, you who are rebellious, you who are full of sin," he says, "I have longed to gather you together like a hen gathers her chicks," and that Jesus is about to walk into Jerusalem, and he is about to suffer, and he is about to die, and he is about to go through this whole list because of our sin. Don't you see that there is a kind of person that reads this passage and says, God did this to me, but we are supposed to read this and see that God does this for me. Not that he makes me be blinded, not that he breaks my bones, not that he leads me off to die, but that he did that for us. It's like, don't you see, my brothers and sisters, when it says he has led me into darkness, that's what we accused him of. And church, that's what our sin did to him. And that's what he did for us. He allowed himself to be carried off into darkness on the cross. Don't you see that when we say that that he shot arrows into our heart, that he is the one on the cross and he endured the arrows of sin and they most certainly struck him in the heart. Don't you see that when we accused him of bringing us down into the place of death, that he went down to death for us? You see, this is so important because on the one hand, it shows how we can so poorly respond to suffering, and yet it shows us exactly the kind of suffering that Jesus poured himself out for you and I. You see, there's three characters. There's Jeremiah. We're going to read an awful lot about him tomorrow or next week. There's Jerusalem, rebellious, broken, sinful, sorrowful Jerusalem. And then there's Jesus. There's God. Jeremiah suffers. He certainly does, and we'll read about him. Jerusalem suffers. It certainly does, and we've read about them. Jesus suffers too. But don't you see, here on this day of Thanksgiving, as we read from the book of Lamentations, lamenting, what can we be so thankful for? Isn't it incredible that in the character assassination piece, as Jerusalem still blaming God for everything, still blaming God for all of their problems, still blaming God for their own choices, Jesus comes in and takes the worst of our accusations and he puts them onto himself. We tried to disparage him. And we said to him, he said, you have hidden like a bear or a lion waiting to attack me, leaving me helpless and devastated. You have drawn your bow and you've made me the target of your arrows. He came. He took those accusations and he lived them out through himself. In Isaiah 53, Isaiah, another prophet in the city of Jerusalem who was killed for prophesying, in Isaiah 53, verse 3, he says that speaking of Jesus, speaking of the coming of Jesus, he said he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Jesus came and he suffered what kind of suffering? This kind of suffering. The worst. Us at our worst is how he suffered for us. You know, in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4, it says that God is so rich in mercy and he loved us so very much that yet when we were dead in our sin, he made us alive when he raised Christ from the dead. We were dead in our sin. What does that mean? When we were at our worst, when we were at our farthest, when we were in lamentations, crying out, enemies of God, that's when he came for us. And he took our suffering and he lived our suffering. You see, Lamentations is so important. You know, it teaches us how to be sorrow-filled, and we're going to learn about that next week. But it also teaches us what kind of suffering Christ endured. He did this for us. Jerusalem said he did this to us. The cross says that he did it for us.